In this tutorial, we will show an overview of our plugin for 3ds Max plugin and V-Ray render engine. Once RenderBeamer and the plugin are installed, open your scene and make sure that it is set correctly and well optimized. You can start a full-res test render to confirm that the render look fine and the renderer shows you expected estimated render time. When it's done, forward the scene to the RenderBeamer using the Beam It Up option. Our plugin will check your scene for possible errors, and if there are any, you will be informed with the prompts. Once the checking procedure is done, you will see the main plugin UI. On top, you can switch language and set plugin settings. Show Confirmation prompt will display information window after each successful data transfer to RenderBeamer. Upload original Max scene for VR scene will allow our plugin to forward Max file along with exported VRScene file. Select Anapack file manually will allow you to manually indicate where the Anapack file used in the scene is located. Now let's close the plugin settings and take a look on at the main window. The plugin UI is divided into 3 sections: mode selection, cameras with render range, and render settings. First, let's take a look at the mode selection panel. Depending on scene GI and animation scenario, you can choose between 4 modes. At the top of our rendering modes list is the default Render As Is mode, suitable for both test and final rendering. This mode renders your scene without modifying any GI settings or render options, making it ideal for scenes with single-frame GI settings or pre-cached GI maps. Whether you're rendering a single frame or an animation, just ensure that your map is correctly connected to your exported scene. The second mode on the list is Still Image mode with strips, designed for rendering high-resolution single frames. Our custom distributed rendering technique assigns each render node 1 strip to render. You can use GI caching in any configuration, or turn it off altogether. We highly recommend leaving the bake switch on when using cacheable GI engines like Irradiance Map and Light Cache. This will cache GI to files and use it for rendering, avoiding the need for each render node to calculate GI separately from scratch. The third and fourth modes on the list are specifically designed for animations. If you select the Irradiance Animation mode, we will switch your GI setup to Irradiance Map and Light Cache. The Irradiance Map mode will be set to Animation Pre-Pass, while Light Cache will be set to Progressive Path Tracking. On our farm, Scene GI will be cached to files first, and once caching is complete, we will render frames using the pre-cached GI maps. GI cache is calculated for every frame, so rendering a range of 0 to 100 will generate 101 VR map files. We recommend using the Irradiance Animation mode for scenes containing many animated objects, materials, or lights. The final mode on our list is Irradiance Camera, designed specifically for scenes where the camera is the only animated object. In this mode, we also change GI to Irradiance Map and Light Cache, but we cache GI using the step value. By default, we cache GI every 10th frame. GI caching can be done using single node or multi-node. The single node option caches GI using one fast render node, while the multi-node option splits your render range over multiple render nodes. We recommend using the second option for scenes with a longer render range. Before using the Irradiance Animation or Camera mode, ensure that your GI setup is set to Irradiance Map and Light Cache. Otherwise, use the Render As Is mode. Let's move on to the camera and render range settings. The plugin UI displays all renderable cameras, which can be easily turned on or off. You can specify the render range for each camera by double-clicking in the Frames column and entering a single frame value or an animated range from your project's timeline. You can also set a global render range with the text box and Apply to All button. Once the cameras are set, let's move on to the next section of the plugin. The Render Settings section allows you to adjust the bucket size, width, and height. There are 3 output options available through switches. Use Frame Buffer enables the V-Ray Frame Buffer output, which should be used with the Use Split Channels switch to save frames, as V-Ray standard frame buffer space separated into RGB channel and alpha. The next output switch is Use Raw Image, which saves all outputs for your scene as a single multi-layer EXR file that includes all render elements and layers. The output switches are linked to the Output Selection drop-down menu, which allows you to choose the V-Ray image file format or the 3ds Max image file format. By default, the output format selection lists are disabled. To enable them, check the Overwrite extension box and select your desired format from the list. Keep in mind that choosing the output format from the drop-down menu will change your current format setup to the default output settings. The next switch is the V-Ray Buffer Gamma Override switch, which allows you to adjust the gamma setup for V-Ray specifically. Below the output format switches, you will find two options for the camera path. Just as in the output format settings, both the irradiance map and light cache camera paths are read from the scene. The last two switches are New Project Name, which can be used when rendering multiple projects using same assets, and Send as.var Scene, which will export your 3ds Max project to the V-Ray standalone and render it with dedicated standalone version. The last but most important one is the Send to the Farm. Once you click it, your project will be forwarded to RenderBeamer and uploaded to the farm with the desired render settings. That's basically it when it comes to 3ds Max plugin settings and options. Happy rendering with Copernicus Computing.